held them back, that have caused them to put a pause on volunteering. But yet that day was a day of celebration. It was meant for a day to set the standard of what an expungement fair was to look like. And the months and months and months of planning and scheduling, it all happened on June 2nd, 2021, right here on the front lawn. We knew we wanted to celebrate it, but with not just our local friends and leaders, but also open it up to higher dignitaries. And so we had with us that day the governor, lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the solicitor general, the secretary of state, the assistant secretary of state, 3 Supreme Court justices, our own congressman, and very invested local leaders from churches and other groups to witness this historic event. We opened up to get their records expunged. And to come to find out, when you look back, there were 1,443 people that showed up that day. 1,400. One of our events that triggered an entire response from the office of sheriff and the staff, and it flooded our whole front office. That didn't stop us. All the ins and outs of putting a mass event together, even when little things happen, plans on plans on plans. And after we were there to witness people's lives being restored and dignity given back and second chances and lines everywhere with kids, elderly, special needs and wheelchairs were watching this happen, and they were celebrating with us. One particular little girl, beautiful. And while ever this was happening and we were making sure that the plans of what we were doing were all done professional and efficient, a call came in to 911. You better have all the police at the Genesee County Jailhouse. There's going to be a bomb threat at 4 p.m., Saginaw Street, Genesee County Jail. This call came in at 2:26 p.m. The last line of the call is the most stunning. Be prepared. On a day where we are celebrating the return of people's lives, this disruption came in. But what law enforcement does and does well and does best, we went into our contingency plan. We immediately dispatched it out. We were assisted by the Michigan State Police, who I give great credit and thank you for Post 35 sending over their own explosive dogs. Our explosive dogs that had already done the sweep in the morning came back. We enlisted the support services of our local FBI, and I give great thanks to that Safe Streets Task Force and the intelligence of our local office to start backtracking where this came from. And we locked down this place. The Attorney General was right there with me in my office, the Solicitor General. By that time, the Governor had gone, the Secretary of State had gone, the Justices were still here. But whoever called this in had no idea. All they knew was there was a lot of people here, a lot of special people. And this disruption, one thing after another, we do risk assessment to determine, do we shut it down? Do we let people go? Do we escort out? So these are decisions, and I'm not going to get in the weeds on them, but let me just say it involved a lot of bright minds. But I'm happy to say during the whole process, the Attorney General and her staff and all our dignitaries, they had faith in law enforcement. So we started a hard perimeter. We locked down Saginaw Street. We locked down Court Street, around the building. We had the drone back up. We swept the bags. We swept all the people in line. We kept the music going. We made sure that the people here were safe, and that's what happened. And once that was done, we waited. It was determined by all law enforcement professionals, and ultimately it was my decision to stay the course. And at 9:30 that night, we all packed up. Nobody was injured. There was no bomb. It was simply a threat, a domestic threat. So we went on an investigative marathon. And I give great credit to not only the state police and the FBI, but to the Office of Sheriff, the detectives that have worked nonstop since the 2nd of June to find the suspect who called in this threat at 2:26, and we found him. There was a felony warrant that was already in lien for this individual for burglary, and we knocked down every lead we could. Thanks to the help of the prosecutor and his staff, we wrote nearly a half a dozen search warrants. And on the 10th of June, this suspect walked into this jail and turned himself in. Before I turn over to the prosecutor for the prosecution side, I want you to see what we were looking at. This is an aerial view and a side view of what happened, what was taking place on that day. And on that day, people stood in line not knowing what was going on around, but I can assure you this, like law enforcement around the nation, we protect when no one sees. You had people in line. We had a kid zone here. We had people from all over the county, Genesee County. We had our fingerprint station here. But what you also don't see is what was happening around. And we kept the people safe. Once we had the suspect, continued to work with Prosecutor Leyton, we turned the investigation over. And before I reveal the suspect in this case who's lodged in jail right now, I'd like to let the prosecutor determine and give you an example of what happens on his side when we work together.
So on the day of the expungement fair, which was Wednesday, June 2nd, the sheriff's hosting it right here where we are now. And as you've heard, in attendance were a number of dignitaries, and the sheriff has mentioned those folks who were here. Around 2:30, the phone call comes in for a bomb threat that's supposed to happen at 4 o'clock that afternoon. With the help of the FBI, the Michigan State Police, led by the sheriff, we were able to identify the suspect as Cesar Terrell Brown. As it turns out, Mr. Brown had a felony warrant for breaking and entering through the 67th District Court. Mr. Brown was receiving pressure from his family to turn himself in. Mr. Brown was very nervous about turning himself in and frankly didn't want to go to jail. So he decided to call in the bomb threat because he believed that bomb threat would close down the jail, and then he would not be in a position to have to succumb to the pressures from his own family and turn himself in. So he called in that bomb threat thinking that would make all things go away. Well, the investigation has revealed, and we believe, that Mr. Brown actually watched a Facebook live broadcast of the expungement fair and was very aware of what was going on here. In addition, if he watched it, he had to have known, we believe, that the dignitaries were present: the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the sheriff, and yours truly. So we believe he had that knowledge. Based on that, I charged him with 2 counts. I charged him with the first count, false report or threat of terrorism. The language of the warrant reads that he did knowingly make a false report of an act of terrorism and did communicate the false report to another person. That is a felony crime punishable by up to 20 years in state prison. Count 2 was using a computer to commit a crime of a maximum of 20 years or more, and that separate crime is also a 20-year maximum felony crime for which he can go to prison for up to 20 years. Now, he is facing 2 serious felony crimes, and as happens in our county, if you think you're going to get away with it, you are not. We do not look favorably upon terrorism threats. We do not look favorably upon bomb threats. We do not look favorably upon threats called into public schools, as we have shown over this past number of years. So this gentleman is in some hot water. He is innocent until proven guilty, but I thank the sheriff, I thank his staff and all the detectives who worked so hard on the case, and I am confident that we will be able to find justice for the community and for Genesee County.
And I just want to add that when things like this happen and the social media picked up what was going on during this time, that there was a bomb threat, there's a lot of moving parts. But what we want to assure people is the protection of innocent bystanders and victims is our utmost priority. So to imagine whatever you were doing on the 2nd of June, till this day, we've been working the case. As the prosecutor alluded to, you can't put fear and terror into innocent people without being held accountable. So we wanted to bring this message to you separate from all the other things that we do to let you know that local law enforcement, state police, sheriff's office, FBI work together to bring safety to that day and the people that showed up here. And any other event that we have on this lawn or in this county, we will make sure that we do all that we can to protect it. And if anybody tries to disrupt that, we will hold them accountable. So great thanks go out to the prosecutor, for your staff. During the process, we were writing search warrants by the hour to track where this individual was through social media, through different phone numbers and different other sources we use. And it was a seamless process, albeit taken 8 days. It worked out. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the outside?
Do we know, has he appeared in court already? Has he been arraigned?
I think he's been arraigned already, yeah.
We'll get all those details emailed to you as far as his bond.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Great. I was here that day.
Yes, you were.
Came back later in the day and still had no idea of what was going on. And I would imagine that was your intent. At any point, like when you started doing things like sweeping bags and having the dogs kind of actively sniff around,
Yep.
did anyone else have any inkling of what was going on?
So in any investigation, especially with large crowds, you have to look at motive and opportunity. And these micro decisions that we make, what we don't want to do is create a panic. And so when you have active events happening, you're behind the scenes determining, does this person, what is their motive? Why are they doing this? As best we know. But do they have the ability and the opportunity to carry out this threat? And had we not been able to lock it down within minutes and have explosive dogs here and also track where we think it came from, then we may have had a different way of communicating with the people. But we purposely kept them festive. We kept the music going while we, behind the scenes, started to unravel this thing. That's why the burden of what we do is so great in law enforcement, is we're always balancing risk. And we were allowing to have people enjoy the day while at the same time we were doing our duty behind the scenes.
I can tell you, Mike, I was here that day, obviously, and I was back and forth because I had other duties at the courthouse. And when the bomb threat came in, the sheriff and his people briefed me, but I didn't hesitate to come back because I knew he had it under control. And actually, nothing really changed from pre-bomb threat to post-bomb threat because the sheriff and his staff had it so under control that things just went on as normal. But those of us in law enforcement knew that there was this issue, but we were all confident that we were going to be fine.
The investigation, was this trace the phone calls? Did you get tips? Can you give us any insights into what actually led you to Mr. Brown?
Well, we were able to with the help of various agencies, and everybody's got their specialty and their expertise, we were able to identify a phone number and an app that's out there. All these apps are out there now. And when these guys who have great knowledge were able to put all this together, it led to Mr. Brown.
And Mr. Brown was charged with the felony of breaking and entering. Was he fleeing from prosecution at this point?
He had an outstanding warrant, and he didn't want to turn himself in about it. So that had happened sometime before, and his family was pressuring to come turn himself in, and that's not what he wanted to do. So we thought if he could, you turn yourself in here. He could turn himself in a court, but eventually you end up here because you have to be booked, and this is where you're booked. And he thought, well, if they can't book me, I can't turn myself in, then I won't have to do it. So that was his plan and his modus operandi.
Is that also a 20-year felony, his initial?
The breaking and entering? No, that's not. breaking and entering of commercial building is a 10-year. I think that's what he's charged with.
Would he be charged for concurrent or consecutive sentences if he's found guilty? Or is that too far up the road to discuss?
I don't think there's a consecutive issue with respect to either of the new charges. So, but a 20-year felony, if convicted, by sentencing guidelines, will land you in prison.
So the question is, during a bomb threat investigation, when do you determine that it's valid or not? And I don't think we ever come to that decision and that conclusion until much after the investigation starts. And there's so many variables. But it goes back to, we even look at the quality of the call. We determine, based on what we know, do they have a social media footprint? Did we let people in the perimeter, which we had set up hours and hours before? We had 3 different levels of perimeters. And I will tell you, it's a lot of this experience comes from when we have executive dignitaries come from the federal government to our community. This is what we're used to. Bigger agencies work with Secret Service, ATF, DEA. We are experts in the field of protection. And so those perimeters are already set up. So initially, did anybody breach those perimeters? Was there anything that was unusual? We had drones in the air. And I'm saying this because I want people to know that we use all technology to keep every event safe. But it's a step-by-step process, and a lot of it is the empirical data that we gather. A lot of it is gut instinct, and you know, you have to balance that risk. Do we vacate this place and create a greater panic with hundreds and hundreds of people all at once yelling, "Excuse me, you know, we have this incident"? We just felt that the better way to do it, and thanks to what the prosecutor said, everybody felt comfortable with it. But comfort with tension, if that makes sense. And every step of the way, we have a state elected official that was right here in that building who was comfortable with every step. Her own dignitary protection was comfortable working with us in every step of the way. So we were comfortable to do what we did, and it turned out to be the best decision for the good of the expungement fair itself.
Are there any circumstances where like a burglary charge like what you had would have been eligible for an expungement?
I guess the question is, was his charge able to be expunged? And he wasn't even arraigned on that charge. It was a fresh warrant, so he wouldn't even be considered an expungement. As the prosecutor alluded to, his goal was to disrupt the whole thing so he didn't have to come down here.
Yeah, you have to have a conviction before you can apply for an expungement. And he hasn't been convicted yet. He hasn't even been arraigned yet on the underlying charge, on the breaking and entering.
Now, does the fact that the governor and other state officials are here, is that an exacerbating part of this charge, or would he have been charged the same thing by phoning in a bomb threat to anything?
Well, no, I think the fact that there was the expungement fair going on, and we had upwards of 1,400 people here, plus the dignitaries, helped me make the decision that this was a terrorist threat as opposed to, and I don't want to downplay it, but a simple bomb threat. This was more because of the activities going on here, because of the dignitaries present, and because this is a jail complex. So based on all that, I made the decision to charge him with the 20-year felony. There is a 4-year phoning in a bomb threat charge, but I thought that that was too low based upon what I know at this point.
And I also want to make it clear, is nothing indicated that he intended to hurt any dignitary. It just so happened they were here when he called in the threat. When I say here, throughout the day, at the time the threat was called in, the only dignitary on site was the Attorney General, Solicitor General, and the 3 justices. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor.
Sheriff, thank you. Good.
What was Mr. Brown's reaction when you told him the seriousness of these current charges that he's picked up because of this?
He was humbled.